Thanks everyone for coming. My name is Doug Williams. Like it says on here, I'm the Associate Dean for Administration and Finance in the College of Engineering. And so Rusty Edwards and I, Rusty will be up here in a couple minutes, we'll be talking about how budget and finance works in the college and answering questions you might have. And I'm going to start it off, there's several groups in the Dean's office, and so I want to make sure to talk about the folks who fall roughly under finance and administration in our office. And so just so you may have seen these names before, or maybe not, but you'll know who's up there. And so under finance, Rusty, who will be talking in a few minutes, is there, and our accountants, Belinda Dials and Cherie Calhoun-Mays. Facilities, Brad Satterfield and Dave Stoudemeyer are heavily involved, particularly in things like lab fit up for new faculty and other facilities projects. And we also have two facilities managers who work in buildings where there are multiple schools or multiple colleges. So Rod is in Bunger Henry and Todd is in Ford ES&T, because since there's multiple schools in there, they report up through the college instead of through one of the schools individually. Okay. Human Resources, Linda House is our Director of HR for the college. And Information Technology, DDA is the director, and then there's several other IT folks who help out with IT projects that impact the whole college or even the whole institute, whether it's backup or cloud services or software tools. Okay, and so these are the people in our part of the Dean's office. And actually, I'm going to pass it off to Rusty now.
All right. Let's see a little clicker. Is there anybody in here that hasn't heard of Workday? Huh? Shut up, Brad. So Workday is coming. I haven't seen in Game of Thrones, but I've seen Winter is coming. So it is coming. It's going to be here in 5 days. So they're going to be working on it this weekend, and it'll roll out July 1, which is Monday. So I just want to throw a little humor in here. This is what's going through my head, the final countdown, if anybody's heard that song before, but it's, we're getting there. We're almost there. So this is months and years in the making, so get ready. So I kind of want to go over highlights of the Workday implementation, where we're at. It's going live July 1. If you have any questions, if you go to the transformation.guitech.edu site, that's got all the information you can get, basically, about this. That's what it looks like here. And I kind of want to go through, terminology is changing. Everybody's probably called projects for years now, or account number, or whatever you want to call it. There's side-by-side crosswalk of the old terminology and the new terminology at this link. But moving forward, project numbers are going away. They're drivers, driver work tags, so you're going to hear that a lot. So I would go out here and check this out if you have a chance to go out there and look and see what terminology is changing. And then when we go live, we're going to have a lot of different help desks. I don't know if anybody's heard of ServiceNow. We're going to be going to that as well. You can do service tickets for Workday questions. Actually, you can go out there and type in a question, and if it's in the database, you'll find out, how do I do a travel authorization? You can click on that and see that without having to put a ticket in. Peer network, so there's people embedded in your units that are gurus/peers that will be helpful at the unit level that you can go and talk to. There's open lab sessions and tips and tricks and job aids, and a lot of that's actually on the transformation site. And for those of you who've not done any training, this is the website. I would highly recommend going out there because things are going to be completely different and things will change a lot. If you're doing travel now, procurement now, or if you want to go out and just see what it looks like, I would go out here and just do the training, and just highly recommended. If you're an accountant, you better, hopefully you've already taken all this stuff. So some important changes are travel. One of the highlights is you're not having to do the barcode sheet for people that do that. You don't have to do that anymore. Some things that are not on there, if you're doing a spend authorization or a travel authority, you're going to have to hit a link to go out and get the per diem rates. Just things to look out for. And travel will now be encumbered. It's not currently, so it will be, so you can account for it. And the P card, anybody here have a P card? All right. And so at the statement level, you're going to be attesting at the transaction level. So there's going to be a little more to it now. So these are kind of the highlights of Workday. Anybody have any questions about Workday? All right. Okay. Going once. Okay, that's it. Now, I've been heavily involved in Workday, and I've also been heavily involved in the CAR, the Comprehensive Administrative Review. And y'all remember taking the survey a year plus ago? And we've been going through data for months, and I just want to give you a heads up of where we're at and where we're going. Did everybody go to the town hall? Okay. Fun stuff. All right. So we're trying to finalize a plan with the USG. That's where we're at right now. We've gone through and made some tweaks and looked at all the data, and we've made some recommendations, and we're getting that approved, hopefully. And we got to do specific details about changes we make to services, structures, roles, and responsibilities. I think Bud brought this up about centralization. He did the air quotes when he did it, but so there will be some changes across campus. And so we're working with leadership, with the new system implementation, other changes across. So we're doing this in light of the Workday and the HCM that's coming out. So we're working on that. And the 4 areas that have been identified are IT, HR, communications, and facilities. Which is facility? Finance, budget and finance. So those are the 4 areas that we've looked at. So and those are the areas that we're kind of identifying right now. So, and we're working on process improvements and have a plan for how we achieve our goal. All right. So this is kind of where we're going. Again, it's the 4 areas that talked about, and we're going to be looking at job structures, how things are structured on campus. And how can we do things more efficiently moving forward. And we're kind of in this area right here, this next steps, where we're going to be working with units to our groups to coming up with, how can we better improve services, activities, roles, and postings, and important relationships. And that's kind of a high-level CAR. I don't know if I'm telling y'all anything different than you got from the town hall, but before I hand it back to Doug, does anybody have any questions about the CAR? Okay, nobody? Oh, nobody? Okay.
I wasn't at the demo. So what about other areas, academic being one? What are
Are you talking about, these are the 4 that we're focusing on. Now, whether, I think this is enough.
So we're not in trouble right now?
I'm not saying it. Nobody's in trouble. But these are the 4 that we're looking at, because this is a big, something to bite off right here. So, no, would be my answer. Safe harbor. No, I'm just kidding. Anybody else?
Is it still possible to give it input?
Yeah, if you, is Ask CAR, they have a there's a email address, and I can't remember, I think it's Ask CAR at GodTech, but you can still put input in there, yes. We're still receiving input and still going through some information, so. Anybody else? All right. Well, I'll hand it back over to Doug. Thank you.
So changing topics, I'm going to talk about how the budget process works here on campus. And it's always kind of walking the line between describing the process and giving new information about what's happening this year. So I'm trying to do some of both of these. This is a list of most of the major events that happened in the budget process for this coming year, I guess next week, starting July 1, how it was done. These are most of the events that happened that the college was involved in. It actually starts earlier than this. So this calendar starts on February 15th, which is when the Form 2 requests were due from the schools to the college. I'll describe that, what exactly a Form 2 is in a minute. But even before this, for instance, in early December, there was a presentation by the Georgia Tech president to the system chancellor to describe what Georgia Tech's priorities and requests are for the next year. So it starts even as early as December, but in February and March, things get busy for us. And so the Form 2 is really asking the units, what would you do if you had more money? It's usually an easy question, but it's a list of things. And there are two types of requests. There are recurring requests, which are things you're asking for that will need money for every year, usually positions. So if you're hiring a new person, that's more than 1 year because you want it to be something that goes on indefinitely. And there's also non-recurring, which are things that are one-time costs. So if it's a renovation, a piece of equipment, something like that, it's something you buy one time and it's not every year. And so it's called, for whatever reason, it's form number 2, so it's a Form 2 request. And the schools all generate a list of requests that gets sent to the college. The college has some of its own requests. Those all get pulled together and rank ordered and passed on to the provost office. And these are the requests from the college of what we would do with additional funding for the next year. And so that is actually passed on to the provost office on March 4th this year. So we have a meeting, Rusty and I and the dean, Steve McLaughlin, met with the provost office. So there's the provost, someone from the Institute Budget Office, I think Robert Foy was there, a couple other folks from the provost office, and we talk about the college's priorities for budgeting for the coming year. And that was on March 4th. There's also a presentation that the dean gives to the executive leadership team, so the president and the executive vice presidents, near the end of March, which is a very short presentation. It's about 20 minutes long, listing the priorities for the college. As you might guess, 20 minutes is not a lot of time to go into detail, so the detail was done earlier in the meeting with the provost and in the paperwork that we've already given them. And so this is a shorter presentation to let the entire team know, the leadership team know what our priorities are. In between is actually something I left off on here. Between March 4th and March 25th, in early March, there's a monthly dean's meeting where the deans meet with the provost. The March one, every dean, so the 6 academic colleges plus the library and professional education, they all give a short presentation of about 10 or 15 minutes on what their priorities are for their college or their unit, which is interesting because you see the range of how different deans do things differently. The priorities are different. How they ask for money is different. So it's interesting to see all the different strategies there, and we see those, and those talks get modified for the executive leadership team talk later on in the month. Okay, and then at the state level, in late March, early April, I think it's actually the first week in April this year, that's when the university system budget gets approved by the state government. So the House and the Senate vote on it and approve it. And at that point, we have a fairly good idea of what the university system budget is for the coming year. Okay. So what's good about that is by the state constitution in Georgia, all the legislature does is approve a block of money. They don't say what the money's for. And that keeps them from carving things out for different schools, different purposes. They just say, here's the money for the university system, and the university system divides things up and distributes it among the different campuses. Okay. The Board of Regents meeting in mid-April is when they approve both the formula allocation. So the formula refers to how the state computes how much money comes to the university system. I'll say a little bit about that in the next slide. And they also approve in April tuition rates and merit increase this time. And so that's a lot of major blocks in the major components of the budget get approved in April. And then very quickly, we have the Institute budget due May 3rd. So a lot of things happen quickly in April. too quickly, I think, but they get done. So the Institute turns in its budget on May 3rd, and the Board of Regents approves that budget on May 14th, and then we know what our budget's going to be for the next year, at least the initial budget. Now, all this is initial budget. Things change during the year. So I'll have some information, because what I'll be showing for the initial budget is already out of date. I have some more information on how that's changed already since April. Okay. At the university system and state level, this is largely information about what happened this year. So like I said before, April 4th, the state legislature had approved the budget. What happened this year, there was full funding to the university system for the formula. Now the formula is based on enrollment. How many students are enrolled in the different campuses in the state. It's also based on how many classes they were taking. So the formula really is a formula. So it's based on graduate students count more than undergraduates in terms of the amount of money that gets transferred. There are about 5 different categories for subjects. So engineering is the second highest category behind med school, law school, and similar things in the highest category in terms of dollars per semester credit hour. So they count up how many credit hours we teach, and that impacts the formula for the university system. The university system gets its money, and then they use a different method for deciding how to distribute it among the campuses. Historically, Georgia Tech has gotten about 85% of its formula funding, of the formula funding generated. For a number of reasons. A part of it is some of the money stays downtown with the university system, so you rarely get 100%. Also, Georgia Tech is viewed as having more funding sources than many of the campuses in the state. So most of the campuses in the state, it's the state appropriations and it's the tuition, and that's it. Georgia Tech has lots of other sources, so when things get tight, we see less money from the state. Okay? Last year and this year, last year we got 100% of our formula funding, which is maybe the first time it's ever happened since I've been here in the last 30 years, at least first time I know of it happening, which was great. The reason was the enrollment growth in the university system was all at Georgia Tech. And so the president argued, we need to get more formula funding. If the enrollment growth is on our campus, we need to get that funding. Now, it's not to say that we're the only campus where enrollment grew. It's just to say that if you look at the enrollment growth for the whole university system, it was almost identical to the growth at Georgia Tech. Now, there's some other campuses where it grew, other ones where it shrunk, but those all were kind of balance each other out. The growth was largely here. Most of the growth was in online master's degrees. So the growth they look at was 2 years ago. So it's always a 2-year lag. And when you have 8,000 students in one online master's degree, that's going from 0 to 8,000 is a huge growth, and that was what most of the growth was. So there are 3 online degrees now: the CS, analytics, and cybersecurity, and those are where most of the growth has been. There's been other growth, but it's been small compared to that, and that's been what's driving it there. And there are also graduate courses, so that carries a little more weight also. Other things that happened this year: full funding of facilities, operations, and maintenance formula. This is based on how many square feet we're occupying. And so that's gone up this summer with CODA, using half of CODA. And so we'll get more funding for this coming fiscal year based the additional square footage there. There's been some increases for the whole university system for health insurance and teacher retirement systems. They passed on 75% of the overall cost. Part of that, I think, is because we have a lot of sponsored research here, and the fringe rate on the sponsored research should be paying for part of that also. So it's not 100% funding, but it's most of it. Tuition increases are actually a surprise for Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech had planned on a 2% tuition increase, and we got 2.5%. So there's a little bit of additional tuition there. Also, our enrollment is going to be up a little bit in the fall, so a little bit of additional funds there, which is It costs us more because there's more students to teach, but it's good from a budget perspective because there's more money in there for tuition, both from the increase and from increase in tuition and the increase in enrollment. We also got, universities have also got funds for major repair and rehabilitation. So this is maintenance on our buildings. And there are not any major projects for college engineering this year. There's some that are on the list down the road. Probably the biggest one coming up, actually it's not, probably won't even be MRR, is the ESM building. So because it's of its current condition needs a major renovation. And then the other facilities related thing is funding of planning funds for Tech Square Phase 3. So this is going on the northeast corner of 5th Street and Spring Street. So across from the bookstore, across from the Biltmore, kind of that corner. Georgia Tech owns that whole block. The whole block is actually going to be torn down in the near future because they got funding to tear it down. The building itself is slated to open in 2023, so not too far from now. So we got money for planning. We've asked for money in subsequent years for actually building it, and there'll also be donations to build it. The building will have classrooms in it. It'll have a parking garage. It'll also, the plan right now is for all of ISYE to move there. So if any of you are from ISYE, that's will be a big thing coming in 2023. It'll be a combination, at least the very rough planning right now is ISYE plus expansion from Scheller will be the major tenants of that building. Okay, so that's kind of a quick snapshot of the state level, USG level budget for this year. The other question we often get, I have a slide full of numbers here, sorry about that, but is how does the money get allocated from the college to the schools? Now, one thing to keep in mind before the college level, the dominant factor in how much money you get is how much money did you get last year? So whether it's the university system, Georgia Tech, or the college, all of those budgets depend first off on how much you get last year, and there's an increment up or down from that. So the state formula for the USG is all incremental. It's how much of an increase or decrease from the previous year do you get? So, and if you ever fall behind the formula, there's no catch up. It's that is your recurring formula, and subsequent years, has your enrollment gone up or down? How's your funding get adjusted on that? Same thing for the Georgia Tech, same thing for the college. It's all based on the base budget you got last year and increments on that. Okay. Now going from the college to the schools, we try to do a bit more on the activity level in the school, whether it's enrollment, teaching, amount of research being done, having factors dependent on that, so there's more, I guess, more of a reward for doing more funds will flow to you. There's still a big block that has to do with salaries, and that changes a little bit from year to year, but there's also blocks that have to do with enrollment and teaching and research. And so the first table up here are the major components of the initial funding allocations to the schools. So a big part of it has to do with salary dollars for tenure track faculty. It always makes people nervous when we say 8/9 of that. The reason we say 8/9 at this level is so we can put more of a weight on some of the other categories, but we do go back afterwards to make sure not just tenure track salaries are covered, but salaries in general are covered for the school. Okay, but by doing 8/9 instead of 9/9, it gives more of a weight to the other categories also. And the other categories are things that faculty get paid for also. So it's not faculty and staff get paid for it. Another thing I should say before I dive into these categories is we determine the school allocations based on these categories, but we don't tell the school chairs you have to spend money according to these categories. The schools get the block of money, state appropriations, and then it's decided how to spend within the school. Okay, so the other categories, there's what we call a student supports pool, which is $450 per student enrolled in majors in your school, undergraduate and graduate. So every student enrolled in your school, there's the money for that. There's what we call a staff support pool, which is nominally 1/4 of a staff member per FTE faculty member, so full-time equivalent faculty member. You have some faculty are part-time in different schools. There's teaching support, which goes to whatever you do to support teaching instruction in your school, and that's a dollar amount per semester credit hour. So SCH is semester credit hours, and if you teach more students, you get more money through this part of it. There's other things the schools pay for. We just labeled non-personal services, and this is a percentage of the faculty staff salaries for the school. Okay, so these are the different things. So we have salaries, we have students enrolled, students taught, and we also have a category for indirect costs generated. So it's a measure of how much sponsored research does your school do, and how much overhead is generated. So these are all things that the college gets money for, and so we divide it up, and we have weights, and what happens every year is we have a pool amount, which in this case is almost $100 million to distribute in the allocation. The pools here add up to a little bit less than 90 million, and instead of just going and adjusting the numbers, we just scale everything up. And so we take all of these, the student support, all of the support here into one pool, and the research support. We scale it all up by the same percentage, so we make sure we allocate all the money out to the schools. How much goes to the schools? So these are the different pots. It depends on what percentage of the college is the activity in your school. So this chart down here is a chart of all the schools, and what percentage of the college are you in these different categories. And the categories here, there's FTE for the tenure track faculty. So this will tell you, we do FTE is full-time equivalent because we have quite a few faculty who are split between schools. And we have some faculty who are part-time for a year or two. And so that's why we have, say, 8.7, 9.1 percentages of faculty, because they're split up different ways. You see that? So you see your entire faculty pool, what percentage of the college they are. Salaries a little bit different. Faculty all pay different amounts, so there's differences there based on how senior are your faculty, how many assistant professors have you hired recently. Those can all make you above or below the average salary. So that's why the numbers here vary a little bit between FTE and dollars. But the dollars are what determines the salary part of what comes to the schools. The head count is your student count. What percentage of the college are the students enrolled in your majors? Semester credit hours are, what percentage of the semester credit hours taught in the college are taught by your school. And these numbers are all a little bit different between semester credit hours. It varies a little bit depending on how many students in other majors do you teach. That can affect the numbers there. Also, how many credit hours in your major are required for your degree. That varies between majors also. So those are all factors that affect that. And indirect expenditures just depends on how much research do your faculty do and how much overhead does that generate. So these are all, so you take these percentages, you weight them by the pool numbers, and that says how much of the initial allocation your school gets. The doctoral degrees awarded, this is a historical data on the side. If you go back several years, there was a pool of money related to how many PhD students were graduating. We haven't done that recently, but it is a number I track every year just because we did it before for historical reasons. Okay, does this make sense? I don't like putting up a slide full of numbers, but that's what I had in this case. Okay, so the next slide is what do the dollars look like? So this is just taking those percentages, multiplying by the pools, and then you add them all up and you get the dollars that were allocated, the initial allocation for each school. So this is what we do in April, the initial allocation. The numbers change throughout the year, more money comes in the college, and it flows out to the schools. We do look, so these are the initial allocation over here, and this is just one example of what we look at comparisons to see. This is only for the tenure track faculty. We also look at for faculty plus staff, make sure everyone can pay their bills before we do the allocation and make sure we haven't given a school not enough money to pay its salaries, because that would be a major problem. Okay. And so this is what it looks like. Now, like I said, this is the initial allocation. Throughout the year, more money comes in. It may come in for new faculty who are hired. When they start working, their salary shows up, along with some of their equipment startup, funds for lab renovations. There's summer salaries will show up later on also. Second half of this summer will show up almost immediately. The first half of next summer shows up next spring. Tech fee funds will show up. So there are lots of things that come in during the year that trickle in. Also, if you go back, what I said earlier about the Form 2 request, this year was unusual in that we had a lot more successful Form 2 funding than we've had in years. There's new money that's coming to Georgia Tech, and they funded the Form 2 to much more than what we were expecting, which is good news. And so what we've heard about so far, sorry, I keep on moving the microphone around here. What we've heard about so far is the recurring funds. So that, like I said before, there are two types of Form 2 requests: the recurring ones that change your permanent allocation, and the non-recurring, which are one time. So the recurring one are largely positions, and this is, I actually have two slides. If you don't see your school up here, it's because it's on the next slide. Okay, so don't worry about that. All right, and so these are, in the schools, it's almost entirely positions. In the college, it's mostly positions also. Let me just say a few words about these. So in the college, what falls in the college are new tenure track positions. Now these are for the schools. We're not hiring new tenure track positions into the dean's office. That's not something we normally do. It's not something we not make any sense. Okay, so what happens every year when we hire tenure track faculty is we hope for new positions, and we also replace positions of people who have left, either resigning, retiring, and so on. A number of reasons people can leave. And so normally we have 14 to 17 people who leave, 14 to 17 faculty who leave across the entire college, and then we have, like in this case, 4 new. So we're going to be shooting for about 20 new faculty across the whole college. That's about what we shoot for every year. And so part of that is replacement, part of it are new positions, and these go out into the schools. And early fall, we meet with the school chairs and we allocate slots among the schools. Okay. Academic research IT support engineer, this will be someone hired through the dean's office, but again, it will be supporting the schools. I believe this person will be located over on North Avenue, a combination of NARA, but both sides of North Avenue where there are research labs. It's been difficult doing IT support there because there's a number of schools out there on both sides of North Avenue, and they send IT support out basically as needed. So we're trying to have someone who spends most of his or her time out there supporting those research labs. Startup relief, this is basically cash in the college budget because we're already committed for startup equipment, lab fit-ups for new faculty, and those commitments have been going up much faster than new money coming in. And so we were given $1 million in new money. And actually, in some ways, this is, believe it or not, this is actually $2 million because all the equipment startup, all the lab fit-up, we split with the EVPR's office, the Executive Vice President for Research Office. So every dollar we spend in this area, another dollar comes in from the Institute in matching. And so this is really, really useful dollar to have. And this also goes out to the schools because it's for new faculty. So, and then there's positions across the schools. I'd have trouble saying exactly what a lot of them do because I don't remember. We have a description of them, I don't remember what all of them are. But these are positions that were requested by the schools that have been funded. Some are 100%, some are 75%, 9 months. Some are half because half of the salary is coming from some other place. But these are all different. So it's hard to say how many positions there are from this chart. So these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the schools. The other 2 schools are over here. In total, it's a little bit more than $2.8 million, which is, like I said before, it's a lot of Form 2 money. It's almost 3% of the permanent state budget, so it's a great budget year for us. The decisions on one-time non-recurring Form 2 requests, we usually hear about around October because they wait to see what the enrollment is in fall to know how much tuition is coming in. Okay, so we see that there. Any questions about any of this? People? Yes, Steve.
Can you tell us again, why is this year such a good year?
Good question. I have some ideas why it's a good year. We haven't heard completely. Part of it is more tuition than we expected because we got 2.5% instead of 2% for the undergraduate, so that's part of it. Enrollment's going up some. We got more formula funding from the state than we expected. So all those things were added up. And there may be, a lot of positions and positions of authority inside the budget have changed over the last year. So maybe something in there also. That's more speculation on my part. That's part of it. So more money coming in and than expected when the original budget was done is the main factor. Yeah. Okay. Too much time. Okay. So I had a couple other slides I threw in here in case we had enough time at the end. Are there any other questions before I go into this? I wanted to use these to describe where money comes from and where it goes. And it's a little bit dated because this was 2013, so the exact dollar amounts have gotten larger. But what hasn't changed is how we do the budget. So where things come from, where they go, the relative flows are all about the same. So I wanted to show these just to give some idea of when you hear state money, what does it mean? So when you hear state money, it's largely state appropriations, tuition, and overhead, indirect cost revenue generated. These are all what gets summed in here. Now, where does the College of Engineering fall on this chart? So over here, we have the sources. They get sorted into different purposes, whether it's research, instruction, student aid, and so on. The College of Engineering on this slide is part of resident instruction. Resident instruction is more or less everything under the provost. It's a little bit bigger than that, but you can think of it as everything under the provost. And so you can see where the big chunks of the money come from sponsored research, from over there, state appropriations, indirect costs, tuition are the biggest factors coming in here. Okay? And normally these get stirred up in one pot and distributed, or not the research, but the state money gets stirred in one pot and distributed. Okay? Now the question is, how much of this comes into the College of Engineering? And so the next slide takes just the resident instruction part of this and see which part of it is engineering. And so engineering is the block on the top here on the right. And you can see, well, hopefully you can see, I'm trying to see how well those flows show up. The major components of what comes into the College of Engineering. So the biggest flow here is sponsored research. And that's still true. The amount of sponsored research has grown a lot in the last 6 years, but it's still the biggest part. And that's all dedicated for something. Sponsored research comes in, it's all for projects, so it's all going for something very specific. The next largest one here, the one down here, comes from instruction, a combination of state appropriation and tuition for the most part. So it comes from instruction. And then there's smaller things that very small ones that come from plant and academic support. But the biggest ones are instruction and research. Okay. And you can see where funds go also, and all these other things under the provost. The other colleges, President's Office, Library, OIT for supporting academics, and so on. Okay. Any other questions? This is my last slide, so. Yes?
Does Georgia Tech get all the tuition dollars paid by Georgia Tech students, or?
Yes, the tuition dollars stay on campus, yes, yeah. Yeah,
And then when you were doing student credit hours by different schools within the college,
mhm.
are they sort of weighted so that the graduate hours and the undergraduate hours, because you just had like a percent of the total,
Yeah.
but that has that weighting in there of undergrad versus
I
graduate hours?
I use an equal weight on the college allocation. Now, the formula funding for the university system, things are weighted by graduate, undergraduate, field of study. You know, those are all different weights. Within the college, we treat the undergraduates and the graduates the same as far as semester credit hours. Okay. So, yes, Julie.
I've worked at universities where they had graduate students register for a lot of different number of credit hours, but it seems like the department we're in, they say graduate students register for a lot of credit hours. I want
Yes.
to find out, where does the policy come from? Is it only College of Engineering? Is it Georgia Tech wide? And do the regions like that, or is it?
Yes, the reason, yes, so the policy, which is actually institute-wide, is, if you think about the formula funding, it's based on how many hours your students take.
Yeah.
Now, thesis hours don't necessarily count, but other hours can in that formula. And so, and graduate student hours count more than undergraduate. So if all your students who are particularly have assistantships, whether it's research or teaching assistantships, they're told to sign up for the full number of hours. And that's so it impacts the formula funding back to the university system. And so, yes, the regions like it because it has a higher weight coming from the state. And so, yeah, so it does. That's the reason why, even if say a PhD student is taking 2 classes, they register for the full 20 plus hours, so it affects the formula, both for Georgia Tech, but mostly for the university system. Yeah. So that's a big part of the reason, or probably the primary reason, yeah. Yes.
So, for master's students, the last couple of years, we've been told that the colleges get money for the number of master's students that we admit.
Yes.
So we've been encouraged to do that.
Mhm.
From what we understand, last year, we didn't get any of the money because it was based on credit hours, how the students registered, rather
Okay.
than how many students we admitted. So if they registered for a class in another department or whatever, we didn't get the money for that.
Okay, so this year was the first year where they called it an incentive for masters. And so a couple things that, the biggest issue, well, let me describe what happened. So they trying to grow master's enrollment, and I think the budget office determined it was easier to count semester credit hours taken by master's students than the numbers of students enrolled for some reason. And so they did a conversion, which was actually a pretty conservative conversion. So I think they promised what was not difficult was counting the students was not difficult. Figuring out how much tuition they paid was difficult because they promised 20% of the tuition for the growth in master's students. Okay, and they had a hard time figuring out what that was, but they could count as far as dividing it up among all the units. But they could count semester credit hours easier just because they do a better job of maintaining that database, quite frankly. But so they count the semester credit hours, and they had a conversion factor that was fairly conservative in our favor, whereas the amount per credit hour was closer to 30% of the tuition than 20% of the tuition. Okay. But it was only on growth, not the base amount. So the growth relative to fall 2017. And originally they were going to do this for growth for the whole college, which would have meant that no one in engineering would have gotten anything because as a college, we went down for semester credit hours, both fall and spring. But they ended up doing it by school. So in the fall, we were split. Half the schools went up, half the schools went down. The ones that went up got that incentive money. In spring, it was 6 and 2, where 6 of them had gone up and 2 of them had gone down. So the 6 that went up, some of them got fairly small amounts, but all the ones that went up in terms of semester credit hours got, whether they were your students or other students, they got funding for that. So does that somewhat answer?
Somewhat.
I mean, yeah. I know there were a couple of schools that had a big master's enrollment already, and so there was, when they fund these things on growth, that's not good. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we specifically admitted a lot of master students, and we normally don't.
Okay.
For that purpose.
Okay.
And then we ended up not getting the money for it. So that
Okay.
was disappointing.
Which school are you in?
MSE.
MSE. Okay. I'm pretty sure in spring you got something, but yeah. Okay. But I'd have to go back and look. So yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
The growth in these online programs,
Hmm?
most of that growth is outside of the College of Engineering, but how has that impacted the budget numbers that you're seeing? Just the growth of either distance learning or online with the different tuition that they're paying?
It's had a big impact on the formula funding from the state because there are thousands of those students, and just a few years ago, there were none. And so far, at least, the state's been counting them like every other student, which Georgia Tech is happy with, the university system is happy with. I don't know if the state, the politicians realize that there's a difference. So it's actually been good. That was why Georgia Tech's been getting a bigger percentage of the formula funding, because we've had such big growth. I did hear, going back earlier question about why there's more money this year, we were told yesterday that it looked like Georgia Tech got some more money this year based on planning for future enrollment growth. I don't know exactly what that means, but online is certainly part of that. So if I remember, the master's in CS is about at least 8,000 students. Analytics is a couple thousand, and cybersecurity just started. So I don't know what that number is yet. And that's in terms of, now, the programs that have those degrees have a set way of getting funding for that. So they get revenue from that. Okay, so they get a percentage of the tuition to generate as part of offering the master's. So when I did the allocations this year, I pulled out those online students because the tuition was coming in a different way. So it was a slight change this year from previous years. Previous years there were not noticeable numbers of online students. So, yeah. Okay. Yes.
The source at the bottom called agency funds.
Yes. Oh, agency funds. Good question. Those are funds, non-Georgia Tech funds that Georgia Tech is holding for specific purposes. Some examples might be if some faculty host a conference and the revenue for the conference comes through Georgia Tech and Georgia Tech is involved in the hosting. Other agency funds are scholarship is actually a big part that goes up to student aid. So funds that come through for scholarships from other sources will come through there also. And I'm sure there's other big ones that I'm not thinking of because very little, actually almost none of those funds come through engineering except very small amount. So, yeah. All right. Thank you.